Under the soft haze of morning light, the seasons began their quiet shift, each change almost imperceptible at first, a sharper chill in the dawn air, the scent of damp earth lingering longer as Naima walked the village paths. It was as though the land itself was drawing a deep breath, settling into a slower rhythm, and Naima felt this shift echo in her own heart. Since the birth of her child, the village had woven her even more tightly into its fabric, her role expanding with each passing day, a mantle she wore with both pride and humility. The early risers had begun to regard her differently, their expressions filled with something beyond respect, a silent acknowledgement that Naima had become not just a part of their lives, but an essential thread in the fabric of the village's existence. She sensed their unspoken trust, a willingness to place their worries and hopes in her hands, just as they once had with Mzee Juma. Every day as she carried her child close to her chest, her presence brought a comfort as natural as the daybreak or the evening's hush. She had become both witness and keeper of their stories, and with the changing seasons she felt the weight of her responsibilities deepen. In the mornings, Naima would begin her rounds, moving through the village like the sun's light, touching each corner, each household with her presence. She would start with the mothers, joining them in their quiet routines, carrying water from the well, washing vegetables in the cool stream that ran along the edge of the village, her hands quick and practiced. They shared no words about her role, but the women would pause as she passed, giving her a nod or a soft smile, as though acknowledging the place she had earned among them. Children gathered around her, drawn by her calmness, whispering and laughing as they trailed behind her. With each passing season, Naima became less of an enigma and more of a steady presence, someone who was always there, like the roots of the baobab tree. Her mornings often led her to the village's edge, where she would meet the elders as they inspected the fields, assessing the health of the crops and the readiness of the soil for the coming harvest. She listened quietly, her gaze sharp, her mind absorbing the small details, the way the earth responded to the sun, the signs the elders read in the shifting patterns of the winds. It was as though each season was another chapter, a reminder of the land's rhythm, and Naima found herself sinking deeper into this cycle. She knew the patterns now, the quiet signs that signaled the end of one phase and the beginning of another. She could feel the earth beneath her, the land's energy running through her veins, binding her even more closely to the village. Her tasks, once simple and routine, now held a weight that went beyond their practical purpose. When she helped to repair a broken fence or lent her hands to mend fishing nets, Naima felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of fulfillment she could not have imagined before. She began to understand that every small act, every moment of care she gave to the land and the people, was a continuation of the legacy left by Mzee Juma. It was as if his spirit walked with her, guiding her hands, filling her with a steady resilience that grew stronger with each task she undertook. One afternoon, Naima found herself by the riverbank, helping one of the village's younger women weave a new mat for the coming ceremonies. As her fingers worked the fibers, twisting and knotting, she thought of Mzee Juma's quiet wisdom, the way he had once taught her to listen to the land's pulse, to feel its quiet rhythm beneath her feet. She glanced at the young woman beside her, noticing the concentration etched on her face, the quiet determination in her hands. Naima could see her own younger self reflected there, a mixture of eagerness and reverence, a desire to understand the village's ways and to contribute to its life. As they worked, Naima felt her role shift subtly, evolving from that of a learner to a guide, from a listener to a silent teacher. She realized that, just as Mzee Juma had once passed his knowledge to her, she now held the responsibility of passing it forward. As the day faded, Naima returned to the center of the village, where the setting sun cast long shadows over the gathering villagers, drawing them close as the evening chill settled in. The young children, whose laughter had filled the day, gathered around her once more, their faces eager, waiting for the stories she would share. Under the sprawling branches of the baobab, Naima wove tales of the past, of the ancestors who had walked the same paths, touched the same earth, and breathed the same air. She spoke of the stars, of the sea, and of the ancient rhythms that bound them all together. Her voice, low and steady, filled the space around them, settling over the children like a soft blanket. They listened with wide eyes, their imaginations alight, their minds stretching to grasp the vastness of the stories Naima offered. In their faces she saw a glimpse of the future, the next generation of the village, each one a vessel of the stories, each one carrying a piece of the village's soul within them. Days passed, and the rhythm of Naima's life became a steady, grounding force, one that shaped the village as much as it shaped her. She felt herself becoming woven into the rituals, the gatherings, and the unspoken understanding that held the community together. Her presence brought a quiet reassurance to the elders, who now entrusted her with tasks that once would have fallen solely to them. They sought her out for guidance, asking her opinion on matters both large and small, and Naima sensed the subtle shift in their respect for her, a respect rooted not only in her connection to Mzee Juma, but in the trust she had earned in her own right. In the evenings, as the last light faded from the sky, Naima would often sit beneath the baobab tree, her child nestled against her chest, breathing softly in sleep. She would watch the stars emerge one by one, filling the sky with their quiet brilliance, each point of light a reminder of the ancestors, of the countless lives that had come before her. The tree's presence was a steady, unyielding force, a reminder of the continuity that bound the village's past, present, and future. Naima would rest her hand on its rough bark, feeling the texture of its ancient skin beneath her fingers, a silent promise that she would carry forward its legacy, just as it had carried the village through countless generations. As the seasons turned and the days grew shorter, Naima found herself increasingly called upon to perform small rituals, gestures that seemed simple but held profound meaning for the villagers. She would place offerings at the edge of the fields before the harvest, honoring the land and giving thanks for its bounty. She would bless the nets before the fishermen set out, a gesture of protection and gratitude. These acts, though small, grounded her, binding her even more deeply to the land, to the rhythms that governed their lives. She felt Mzee Juma's spirit with her, a steady presence that guided her hands, her heart, her mind. The weight of her responsibilities no longer felt like a burden, but like an anchor, grounding her, giving her life a purpose that stretched beyond herself. She knew that the village's future depended on the wisdom she carried, on the strength and resilience that she nurtured within herself. And as each day unfolded, she felt the legacy of Mzee Juma become her own, a gift she would one day pass on, ensuring that the stories, the traditions, and the love that bound them all would continue to flourish, as constant and enduring as the roots of the baobab tree. In the quiet of the night, with her child sleeping soundly in her arms, Naima felt a sense of peace that was as vast and deep as the land itself. She knew that her place was here, that her life was woven into the soul of the village, her heart forever bound to the people, the land, and the ancient rhythms that had guided them all. And as the stars watched over her, as steady and unchanging as the legacy she carried, Naima felt a deep, abiding love, a love that would hold her steady through all seasons, through all the challenges and joys that lay ahead. The first hint of the stranger's arrival came in the form of whispers carried on the morning breeze, snippets of conversation that reached Naima as she moved through her daily tasks. It was unusual for someone from outside to venture so far into the heart of their village. The paths leading in were known only to those who had lived on the land for generations, woven into the fabric of its rhythms and customs. Yet the villagers spoke of a lone traveller seen near the distant edge of the forest, making their way slowly but purposefully toward the village. Naima paused in her work, sensing the anticipation that spread through the village like ripples on a still pond. A traveller, someone from beyond the hills and rivers that bordered their world, was a rare occurrence, and their presence carried an air of mystery, a promise of stories and knowledge from distant lands. She could feel the quiet stirring of excitement in the children as they whispered and cast curious glances toward the forest's edge. Even the elders, whose expressions rarely betrayed emotion, seemed to carry a hint of curiosity in their eyes. By mid-morning, Naima joined a few villagers who had gathered along the main path to catch a glimpse of the visitor. She watched from a short distance, her child cradled against her, as the figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, their form coming into focus with each step. The traveller was a tall figure, draped in a dark cloak worn and faded by time and sun, their movements slow but steady. The cloak was adorned with intricate patterns unfamiliar to Naima, symbols and lines woven into the fabric, hinting at traditions and beliefs that belonged to lands she had never seen. As the traveller approached, Naima's gaze lingered on their face, marked by lines that spoke of countless journeys, days spent beneath unforgiving suns and nights under star-filled skies. Their skin was weathered, their eyes sharp, taking in the surroundings with a calm awareness, as though they saw not only the huts and people, but the spirit that bound the village together. In their gaze, Naima sensed a deep wisdom, an understanding that went beyond words, a quiet knowledge of paths that led beyond the edges of their world. The village elder, Anaya, stepped forward to greet the traveller, her gestures respectful and cautious, offering the formal greeting reserved for those who carried unknown wisdom. The traveller inclined their head, a brief acknowledgement, and then extended their hands, empty yet somehow full of meaning. Naima could see that, despite the stranger's presence, they had brought no gifts, no offerings, yet their very arrival seemed to be an offering, a silent promise of stories yet to be told, of knowledge that could not be held in material form. As Anaya welcomed the traveller into the village, Naima felt a faint stirring in her chest, a mix of curiosity and caution. She sensed the weight of the visitor's presence, the way their footsteps pressed into the earth as though they too were seeking something beyond mere shelter. It was a feeling Naima recognized, one she had experienced on her own journey into the village, the longing for connection, for a place to belong. The traveller's arrival reminded her of her first days in the village, the tentative steps she had taken, the quiet hope she had carried with her, hidden yet persistent. Over the following days, the traveller became a familiar figure within the village, though they moved with an air of quiet independence, their interactions limited to respectful nods and small gestures of gratitude. Naima watched them from a distance, noting how they observed the villagers' routines, their gaze lingering on the children as they played, on the fishermen as they mended their nets, on the women as they gathered herbs and tended to the fields. It was as if the traveller was absorbing the village's essence, the unspoken language that bound them all, learning its patterns, its heartbeat. One afternoon, Naima found herself alone by the shore, watching the waves as they rolled in and out, the rhythm of the sea calming her, grounding her. She sensed movement nearby, and turned to see the traveller standing a short distance away, their gaze fixed on the horizon. Their presence was unintrusive, a quiet acknowledgement of her solitude, and yet Naima felt a strange kinship, a recognition of the unspoken bond between those who seek and those who watch. She said nothing, letting the silence speak for them both, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. The traveller reached down and picked up a small, smooth stone from the sand, holding it in their palm as if feeling its weight, its history. Naima watched them, her gaze drawn to the way they turned the stone over, studying its texture, its imperfections. In that simple gesture, she saw a reflection of her own connection to the land, the reverence she felt for the earth and the sea, for the stories embedded in every rock, every grain of sand. For a long time they stood together in silence, both of them watching the horizon, each absorbed in their own thoughts, yet somehow united in the moment. Naima felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet understanding that needed no words, no explanations. She knew that the traveller's journey had brought them here for a reason, and though she did not know what that reason was, she sensed that it held meaning, a purpose that would reveal itself in time. As the days passed, the traveller became a part of the village's landscape, their presence as natural as the trees and the rocks, as if they had always belonged. They offered no stories of their own, yet they listened intently when the villagers spoke, their eyes reflecting a quiet understanding that transcended language. Naima observed the way they blended into the rhythms of village life, adapting to the unspoken customs and rituals as if they were already familiar with them. One evening, as the villagers gathered around the fire, sharing stories and laughter, the traveller sat quietly on the outskirts, their gaze fixed on the flames. Naima could feel the curiosity in the air, the villagers' subtle glances as they wondered about the stories the traveller might carry, the knowledge they had gathered on their journey. Yet the traveller remained silent, a quiet observer, their face illuminated by the flickering light, their expression calm and inscrutable. Naima felt a pull, an instinct that drew her toward the traveller. She settled beside them, her gaze following the flames as they danced and crackled, sending sparks into the night sky. She sensed the traveller's attention shift toward her, a gentle acknowledgement of her presence, a silent invitation. For a long time they sat together in silence, the fire casting shadows that flickered across their faces, the night air thick with the scent of burning wood, and the soft murmur of the villagers' voices. Finally, without speaking, the traveller reached into the folds of their cloak and withdrew a small, worn object, a shell, its surface weathered and smooth, the edges chipped and faded. They held it out to Naima, a gesture that was both offering and explanation, as though the shell held within it the essence of their journey, the countless miles they had travelled, the experiences etched into the lines of their face. Naima accepted the shell, feeling its weight in her hand, sensing the history it carried. She closed her fingers around it, feeling the smoothness of its surface, the roughness of its edges. In that moment she understood that the shell was more than a mere object. It was a fragment of the traveller's story, a piece of their life that they had chosen to share with her. She looked up, meeting their gaze, and saw in their eyes a depth of understanding, a quiet knowledge of journeys both taken and yet to be taken. As she held the shell, Naima felt a sense of connection that went beyond words, a bond forged not through conversation but through the simple act of sharing. She knew that the traveller's journey would continue, that their path would lead them away from the village in time, yet she felt no sadness. Instead, she felt a quiet gratitude, a recognition of the gift they had given her, not in the form of words or stories, but in the silent presence they had offered, the reminder that life itself was a journey, a series of moments strung together like the beads of a necklace, each one unique, each one precious. When the traveller finally departed, slipping away in the early dawn as silently as they had arrived, Naima felt their absence keenly, like a hollow space within her chest. Yet she knew that their presence had left an indelible mark on her, a subtle shift in her understanding of her role, of the world beyond the village. She stood beneath the baobab tree, the shell still held in her hand, feeling the rough bark beneath her fingers, grounding herself in the moment, in the place she called home. As the sun rose, casting its first light over the village, Naima felt a deep peace settle over her, a quiet assurance that her path was aligned with something greater, a rhythm that echoed through the land, through the sea, through the stories of those who had come before her and those who would come after. She placed the shell at the base of the baobab, a small offering, a symbol of the journey she had shared with the traveller, a reminder that every life was connected, every story a thread in the vast tapestry of existence. With a final glance at the horizon, Naima turned back to the village, her heart filled with gratitude, her spirit fortified by the traveller's silent wisdom. She knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, carrying forward the legacy of those who had walked before her, her life forever intertwined with the land, with the people, with the timeless rhythms that bound them all together. And as she walked, she felt the weight of the shell in her memory, a reminder of the distant places that lay beyond her world, yet somehow remained a part of her own journey. The storm arrived without warning, its presence announced by a thick, unnatural stillness that settled over the village like a held breath. The air grew heavy, dense with the scent of rain, and the sky darkened as though a shroud had been pulled over the land. Naima felt it before she saw it, a quiet rumbling in the distance, a low, rolling growl that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth itself. The villagers, sensing the change, lifted their heads, their expressions tense, their eyes scanning the horizon as they prepared for what they knew was coming. Naima stood in the village square, her heart beating in time with the distant thunder, her child held close to her chest. She watched as a dark wall of clouds gathered on the horizon, a roiling mass of shadow and light that moved with an eerie, unstoppable purpose. She had seen storms before, had felt the wind and rain lash against her skin, but this one felt different, like something alive, a force that demanded their attention, their respect. The first gusts of wind swept through the village, rustling the leaves of the great baobab tree and sending ripples through the tall grasses that surrounded the huts. The villagers moved quickly, gathering their children, securing their belongings, each one knowing instinctively what to do, their movements practiced and efficient. The elders directed the younger ones, their gestures calm but firm, guiding them toward the more sheltered parts of the village, the places where they would be safest. Naima joined them, her presence a steadying force, a silent reassurance in the face of the impending storm. The sky grew darker, the clouds swirling in angry spirals, their edges lit by flashes of lightning that split the sky with fierce, jagged lines. The wind picked up, howling through the village, tugging at the thatched roofs and rattling the walls of the huts. Naima could feel the air thickening around her, the pressure building as the storm drew nearer, its power palpable, its intentions clear. She steadied herself, feeling the earth beneath her feet, grounding herself in the solidity of the land, drawing strength from the deep-rooted presence of the baobab tree that loomed nearby, a silent sentinel against the oncoming fury. As the rain began to fall, Naima moved through the village, her steps sure and steady despite the chaos around her. She helped the villagers secure their belongings, tying down loose objects, reinforcing the roofs of the huts with additional thatch and rope. The children clung to their mothers, their wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and wonder, watching as the sky transformed above them, the clouds churning like waves in a stormy sea. Naima offered them quiet smiles, a comforting touch on their shoulders, her presence a balm against the rising anxiety that pulsed through the air. The storm hit with a force that shook the village to its core. The wind roared like a wild beast, tearing at the roofs, bending trees until their branches scraped against the ground, their roots straining against the earth. The rain fell in sheets, relentless, drumming against the huts, seeping through cracks and crevices, turning the ground beneath their feet to thick, sucking mud. The villagers huddled together in the shelters they had prepared, their faces lit only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the scene with an unearthly glow. Naima could feel the tension in the air, a collective fear that pulsed beneath the surface, the quiet understanding that they were at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. Yet she also felt a sense of resolve, a determination that ran like a steady current beneath the fear, binding them all together, grounding them in their shared strength. She moved among them, her presence a reminder of the resilience they carried within them, the unbreakable bond that held them together, even in the face of nature's fury. The night wore on, the storm raging around them with an intensity that seemed endless, each gust of wind more powerful than the last, each crash of thunder a reminder of the storm's wrath. Naima held her child close, her body shielding the small figure against the cold and damp, her own strength drawn from a place deep within her, a place that had been fortified by years of living close to the land, by the wisdom she had absorbed from Menzi Juma, by the love she felt for the village and its people. In the darkest hours, when the storm was at its peak, Naima felt a shift within herself, a quiet acceptance of the role she had taken on, the responsibility she now bore. She was no longer merely a guardian or a guide, she was a protector, a force of resilience, a symbol of the village's strength and endurance. She felt the weight of her role settle over her, grounding her even as the wind threatened to tear everything apart, and she knew, with a certainty as solid as the earth beneath her feet, that she would not waver, would not falter. As dawn approached, the storm began to relent, its fury dissipating, the wind easing, the rain softening to a gentle drizzle. The village emerged from its shelters, their faces weary but relieved, their eyes scanning the landscape for signs of damage. The ground was littered with fallen branches and debris, the once tidy paths transformed into rivers of mud, the roofs of several huts damaged or completely blown away. Yet there was no despair in their expressions, only a quiet determination, a shared understanding that they would rebuild, that they would heal. Naima moved among the villagers, helping them assess the damage, her hands steady as she lifted fallen branches, cleared pathways, offered comfort to those whose homes had suffered the worst. She could feel the weight of their trust, the quiet gratitude in their eyes as they looked to her for guidance, for the reassurance that they would recover, that their lives would return to normal. The elders gathered around her, their faces marked by both relief and respect, their expressions reflecting an unspoken acknowledgement of her role in holding the village together through the storm. They did not need to speak, their presence alone was enough, a silent testament to the strength they saw in her, the strength that had carried them all through the night. Naima met their gazes, feeling a deep, abiding connection to each one of them, a bond forged not through words but through the shared experience of survival, of resilience. Throughout the day, Naima worked alongside the villagers, helping to repair the damage, to rebuild what had been broken. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their hands working together as they restored the roofs, cleared the debris, patched the walls. Naima felt a deep pride as she watched them, their movements steady, their spirits unbroken, their faces filled with a determination that mirrored her own. They were a community bound by more than just proximity, they were a family, a collective force that could withstand even the fiercest storms. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the village, Naima took a moment to stand by the baobab tree, its branches swaying gently in the evening breeze, its roots holding firm in the earth. The tree had weathered the storm as it had countless others before, its ancient strength a reminder of the resilience that ran through the land, through the village, through her own heart. She placed her hand on its rough bark, feeling the pulse of life within it, the silent strength that had carried it through the ages. In that moment, Naima understood the true depth of her connection to the village, the unbreakable bond that held her to the land, to the people, to the rhythms of the earth and sky. She felt a quiet peace settle over her, a sense of fulfillment that ran deeper than words, a recognition that her life was woven into the village in ways that could never be undone. As she stood there watching the villagers as they gathered around small fires, their faces illuminated by the warm glow, their laughter mingling with the soft rustle of leaves, Naima felt a surge of gratitude, a love that encompassed not only the people but the land, the history, the future they all shared. The storm had tested them, had pushed them to their limits, but it had also revealed their strength, their resilience, their unbreakable spirit. When the first stars appeared in the sky, Naima looked up, her gaze tracing the familiar constellations, each one a reminder of the ancestors who had watched over the village, who had weathered their own storms, who had passed down the wisdom that now lived within her. She felt their presence around her, a quiet strength that filled her, grounding her, reminding her of her place in the unbroken cycle of life that bound them all. The storm had passed, but its memory remained, etched into the hearts of the villagers, a reminder of the power of nature, of the strength they carried within themselves, of the bond that held them together. And as Naima turned back toward the village, her heart filled with a quiet, steady resolve, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, a guardian, a protector, a part of the village's soul. In the quiet of the night, as the fires burned low and the village settled into sleep, Naima felt a deep, abiding peace, a certainty that her life was woven into the land, into the people, into the unyielding rhythm that would carry them all forward, through storms and calm alike. And as the stars watched over her, as steady and unchanging as the legacy she carried, Naima felt a love that reached beyond herself, a love that had taken root in the land, in the village, in the legacy of resilience that bound them all together. The passing seasons brought subtle changes to Naima's world, her child growing more curious, more attuned to the rhythms of the village, the land, and the people around them. As her child grew, Naima felt an awakening within herself, a quiet but insistent awareness that the time had come to pass on what she had learned, to sow the seeds of knowledge that would blossom in the next generation. This was a different kind of calling, a responsibility woven not from the immediate needs of the villagers, but from the timeless promise to continue the legacy of wisdom that bound them all. Each morning she would take her child to the edge of the village, where the first light of dawn painted the landscape in gentle hues of pink and gold. Here, beneath the open sky, she began her teachings, not in the way one instructs, but rather through the quiet immersion into the life around them. She would point to the sky, where birds flew in graceful patterns, their formations held by instincts as old as the earth itself. She would let her child feel the rough bark of the baobab tree, its texture like ancient stone beneath their small hands, a silent reminder of the resilience and endurance rooted deep within the land. Naima understood that true wisdom was not learned through mere words, it was absorbed through experience, through the senses, through the quiet moments spent observing the world. She guided her child's hands over the leaves and petals, letting them feel the softness, the fragility of life. Each touch, each moment was a lesson in connection, in respect for the living world, in the understanding that everything around them was woven into a single, unbreakable thread. During their walks she would pause by the stream, where Mzee Juma had once taught her to listen, to hear the murmurs of water over stone, the whispers of reeds bending in the breeze. She watched as her child's eyes brightened, following the darting fish that glinted just beneath the water's surface, their small bodies moving with a purpose that needed no explanation. She could see the beginnings of understanding in those young eyes, a quiet fascination with the life that thrived all around them, a spark of recognition that would, in time, grow into reverence. In the evenings, Naima would gather her child along with the other village children beneath the baobab's broad canopy. The tree's ancient branches stretched over them, sheltering them in a circle of shadows and soft, filtered light. Here she would tell them stories, the same tales that had once been told to her, passed down through generations. Her voice was low, steady, each word carrying the weight of history, the knowledge of the elders, the wisdom of those who had walked the land long before them. She spoke of the ancestors, of the spirits of the sea and sky, of the enduring strength of the land. Each story was a gift, a piece of the past offered freely to the future, an unspoken bond that held them all. The children listened, their faces illuminated by the fading light, their wide eyes filled with wonder as they took in the stories, the lessons hidden within the tales. Naima could see the way they absorbed her words, their young minds stretching to understand the world in a way that went beyond what was visible, what was immediate. They were learning not just from her stories, but from the land itself, from the quiet patience of the tree, from the steady rhythms of life that pulsed around them. Naima's child would often look up at her with questions, their small hand reaching for hers, their gaze filled with the curiosity that came so naturally in youth. She would hold that small hand, a grounding connection, and guide them in silence, knowing that understanding would come in time, that the questions they held would find their answers within the village, the earth, and the sea. She felt Mzee Juma's spirit with her, a guiding presence that reminded her to teach with patience, to let the wisdom flow as naturally as the tides, as constant as the turning seasons. As the days stretched into weeks, Naima could see the growth in her child, in the other children who gathered around her. She saw the way they moved through the village, each step lighter, their gazes sharper, more aware. They had begun to carry themselves with a quiet reverence, a respect for the land and the people who had come before them, an awareness that they were part of something larger than themselves. She felt a surge of pride, of fulfillment, knowing that they were absorbing the knowledge, that they were becoming rooted in the traditions and stories that had sustained the village for generations. In the quiet moments, Naima would watch her child, sensing the legacy she was passing on, the wisdom that was settling within them, taking root, preparing to blossom. She knew that one day they would carry this knowledge forward, that they would become the keepers of the village's stories, the guardians of its spirit. It was a cycle as old as the land itself, an unbroken chain of love and learning, a legacy of resilience and respect that would continue long after she was gone. As the stars appeared overhead, Naima felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of completion, knowing that she was fulfilling her role, that the wisdom she had received was being passed forward, woven into the next generation. She held her child close, whispering a promise to the stars, to the spirits, to Mzee Juma, a promise that she would continue this path, that she would nurture and protect, that she would pass on the knowledge with the same care and reverence that had been given to her. And in the stillness of the night, beneath the ancient branches of the baobab, Naima felt the unbroken cycle that held them all, a legacy of love and wisdom that would carry them forward, guiding them, grounding them, connecting them to the land, the sea, and the people who had come before and who would one day follow. The day dawned quietly, the sun rising over the village with a soft, golden light that filled the air with a warm glow. Naima sensed something different in the atmosphere, a subtle shift, as though the land itself was holding its breath. She noticed the villagers moving with a slower, almost reverent pace, their faces touched by a quiet anticipation. The elders had summoned her to the baobab tree, a gathering that happened only for the most sacred of reasons. Naima's heart beat steady and calm, yet beneath that calm, she felt the hum of anticipation, a sense of the weight that awaited her. She knew the significance of the council's call. The elders did not often ask for her presence, they observed her from a distance, their gazes measuring, quietly assessing her growth, her choices, her place among them. She had felt this silent watchfulness over the years, and while their approval was rarely spoken, she sensed it in their subtle nods, their shared glances, and in the quiet trust they had placed in her through the small tasks and ceremonies they'd allowed her to lead. As she approached the baobab, Naima took a deep breath, grounding herself in the presence of the ancient tree, its branches reaching wide above her like protective arms. The elders were already gathered, forming a loose circle beneath its shadow. They stood in silence, their faces marked by the lines of age, each wrinkle a story, each crease a testament to a life deeply lived and connected to the land. She sensed that they were waiting for her, their presence an unspoken acknowledgement of the role she had grown into, a silent invitation for her to join their circle. Naima moved toward them, her steps measured, each one a small surrender to the path she had chosen, the responsibilities she had embraced. She could feel the weight of their gazes as she took her place within the circle, a steadying warmth that filled her with a sense of belonging. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but rather rich with meaning, as though each of them were sharing a moment of reflection, a silent recognition of the journey she had taken to reach this point. Anaya, the eldest among them, stepped forward, her expression calm but touched with a quiet pride. She held a kanga cloth, woven in deep, earthen colors, its patterns mirroring the land and sea that bound them. Naima recognized the kanga instantly. It was one that had once belonged to Mzee Juma, the same cloth he had worn in his own final years as a symbol of his role within the village. Anaya's hands moved slowly, her fingers tracing the fabric with a reverence that spoke of the trust they were placing in Naima, the legacy they were offering her. With a gentle, deliberate motion, Anaya placed the cloth over Naima's shoulders, her touch light but filled with the weight of tradition, of history, of a legacy that stretched far beyond any one life. Naima felt the fabric settle against her skin, its weight both comforting and humbling, a reminder of the responsibilities she now carried. She understood, in that silent moment, that she was being formally recognized as part of the council, that she was now one of them, a keeper of the village's wisdom, a protector of its stories and spirit. The other elders moved closer, each one placing a hand upon her shoulders, a gesture that felt as ancient as the village itself. Naima closed her eyes, letting the warmth of their hands ground her, their silent strength flowing into her, binding her to them in a way that words could never express. She felt the weight of their experiences, the collective knowledge of generations settling within her, a gift as sacred as the land they walked upon. As they stepped back, Naima opened her eyes, meeting each elder's gaze in turn. Their expressions held a mixture of pride, respect, and something deeper, an acknowledgement of the trust they had placed in her, the bond that now connected them. In their eyes she saw the stories they had carried, the lives they had touched, the silent endurance that had shaped them into the guardians of the village's soul. For a long moment they stood together in silence, the air thick with the presence of their ancestors, with the memories that were now hers to protect and pass on. Naima felt a deep peace settle within her, a grounding calm that came from knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be, that her life was now part of the village's heartbeat, an essential thread in the tapestry that bound them all together. As the first rays of full daylight broke over the trees, the council began to disperse, each elder moving back toward the village, their movements slow and measured, as though they were leaving behind a part of themselves in her care. Naima remained by the baobab, feeling the kanga draped over her shoulders, the soft weight of it like an embrace, a silent promise from those who had walked the path before her. She rested her hand against the tree's rough bark, grounding herself in the life of the land, in the history she was now a part of. In the quiet that followed, Naima understood the fullness of her role, the depth of the trust the council had placed in her. She was now not only a guardian of the village but also a guide, a bridge between past and future, a keeper of wisdom and tradition. Her heart swelled with gratitude, with a love that reached beyond herself, encompassing the land, the people, and the spirits of those who had come before her. As the day began in earnest, Naima turned back toward the village, each step filled with purpose, her spirit fortified by the recognition she had received, the bond she now shared with the elders. She knew that her life would be forever entwined with theirs, that the legacy they had entrusted to her would continue through the generations, a testament to the strength and unity that bound them all. And as she walked, the kanga flowing around her like a second skin, Naima felt the spirit of Mzee Juma walking beside her, his presence a quiet strength that would guide her, comfort her, and remind her always of the role she had chosen, the path she would follow, and the legacy she would one day pass on. The decision to make the sacred journey to the distant cliffs came to Naima quietly, like a whisper carried on the wind, a feeling that had grown over time, a subtle pull that seemed to come from deep within her spirit. It was a journey Mzee Juma had once made himself, and though he had only spoken of it in fragments, Naima knew it was something she needed to undertake, not only to honor him, but to honor the bond they shared and the legacy he had entrusted to her. When she announced her intention to the village, the elders gave silent nods of approval, their eyes reflecting both pride and understanding. They knew the significance of the journey, the spiritual connection it held, the timeless tradition it represented. As word spread, a quiet reverence settled over the village, and a few villagers approached Naima, requesting to join her, to offer their presence as a gesture of solidarity and respect. They gathered at dawn on the day of departure, a small group of villagers, elders, children, and a handful of others who felt compelled to accompany her on this sacred journey. Each one carried a small token, a simple offering that symbolized their connection to Mzee Juma, a shell from the shore, a smooth stone, a woven bracelet, a sprig of herbs. Naima carried with her the kanga cloth that had belonged to him, its faded colors a reminder of his life, his spirit, and his enduring influence. The journey began in silence, their steps measured and slow as they followed the narrow path that wound through the forest, up toward the cliffs that rose in the distance. Naima led the way, her heart calm and steady, each step grounding her, connecting her to the land and to the memory of Mzee Juma. She could feel his presence with her, a quiet strength that filled her with a sense of peace, a reassurance that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As they walked, the sounds of the village faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps on the forest floor. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the scent of damp earth and moss surrounding them, mingling with the faint, salty breeze that drifted in from the sea. Each person carried their own thoughts, their own memories of Mzee Juma, the quiet respect they held for the man who had once been the village's guide, its silent protector. The path grew steeper as they neared the cliffs, and Naima felt the weight of the journey settle over her, not as a burden, but as a solemn reminder of the purpose that had brought them here. She knew that Mzee Juma had once stood on these very cliffs, had gazed out over the vast expanse of sea and sky, had felt the same pull, the same connection to the land, to the village, to the spirits that watched over them all. She felt herself drawn toward that same edge, her heart open, her spirit reaching out to the presence that seemed to linger in the air, a silent witness to the lives that had passed before. When they reached the cliffs, the group gathered in a loose circle, each person standing quietly, their gazes directed toward the horizon where the sea stretched out endlessly, its surface shimmering in the morning light. Naima moved to the center, holding the kanga cloth in her hands, her fingers tracing its worn edges, feeling the spirit of Mzijuma woven into its threads. She closed her eyes, letting the wind carry her thoughts, her memories of him, her gratitude for the wisdom he had shared, the strength he had imparted to her. One by one, the villagers stepped forward, each placing their offering on the ground, a circle of shells, stones, herbs, and woven items that surrounded her like a protective ring. Each object carried a piece of their own memory of Mzijuma, a reflection of the ways he had touched their lives, the quiet influence he had wielded, his presence a part of their history, their identity. In this simple act, they honored him, acknowledged the role he had played, the legacy he had left in their lives. Naima knelt, pressing her hand to the earth, feeling the solid ground beneath her, the strength of the cliffs that had stood through countless seasons, weathered by storms and sun alike. She placed the kanga at the center of the circle, letting it rest on the ground, a symbol of Mzijuma's spirit, his unwavering connection to the village, to the land he had loved. The wind caught the edges of the cloth, lifting it gently as though it were alive, infused with the same breath of life that pulsed through the cliffs, the sea, the sky. In the silence that followed, Naima felt a deep calm settle over her, a sense of completion, of fulfillment. She knew that Mzijuma's spirit was with them, that he was watching, his presence a quiet blessing that wrapped around her, holding her steady, grounding her in the purpose she carried. She felt the strength of the village within her, the unbroken chain of lives and stories that connected them all, a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. The villagers stood with her in quiet reflection, each one lost in their own thoughts, their own connection to the man they had come to honor. Naima looked out over the cliffs, her gaze drawn to the horizon, to the endless stretch of sea that lay before them. She knew that this journey, this act of remembrance, was more than a tribute to Mzijuma. It was a reaffirmation of their own bond to the land, to the village, to the spirit that connected them all. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the cliffs, Naima felt a surge of gratitude, a love that encompassed not only Mzijuma but the entire village, the land, the sea, the life that pulsed through every tree, every blade of grass, every person who had come before and who would come after. She knew that her journey was not yet over, that there would be other paths to walk, other lessons to learn, but in that moment she felt a profound peace, a quiet joy that filled her heart and wrapped around her like the gentle warmth of the sun. When the time came to return, Naima and the villagers gathered their offerings, each one taking a piece of the memory with them, a token of the journey, a reminder of the love and respect that bound them to the land, to each other, to the legacy they shared. They walked back in silence, their hearts light yet grounded, their spirits filled with the quiet assurance that they were part of something enduring, something sacred. As they descended from the cliffs, Naima felt a new strength within her, a quiet resolve that would guide her, support her, remind her always of the path she had chosen, the life she was leading. She knew that Mzijuma's spirit would walk with her always, that his wisdom would continue to shape her, that his legacy would live on through her and through the village, as constant and unchanging as the cliffs, as boundless as the sea, as infinite as the sky. And as the village came into view, nestled beneath the wide, protective branches of the baobab tree, Naima felt a deep sense of belonging, a certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, that her life was woven into the heart of the village, into the unbroken cycle of love, remembrance, and connection that would carry them all forward, through the seasons, through the years, through the endless journey of life itself.